Somehow I feel like that the landscape was a part of it from the beginning, and I don't know if that's true or not. But can you talk about how you came to this story and how you came to use this place, which is really a part of the characters, I think?
Sure. The landscape was always. I keep breaking your chair. Sorry. The landscape was always probably like the first character that I wrote. You could say. It was the place I grew up. It's in New Jersey, actually, which nobody believes me, and I really love saying that in New York because people know New Jersey better than anywhere else in the world, and they all misunderstand it, in my opinion. So that's my hometown in northwestern New Jersey. It's all in probably a 30-mile radius to the house I grew up in. Some of my best friends' houses, one of which is here, was used as the family's house. My parents' house was the house that the neighbor lives in, and it was all very much tied to the scenes that I was writing. So from the very beginning, the scenes were written where they took place. The ones that were semi-autobiographical were written where they happened. And yeah, it couldn't be shot anywhere else. It was always where it needed to be in my head. So nature, and specifically that environment, and getting that environment on film in front of people who sort of maybe don't get to see that part of the country or of the state was important to me. And yeah, I think it's just as valuable of a character as Tommy or Eric or any of their friends. It's sort of it's always kind of a call and response. The way I see it is it's kind of whatever's going on in their heads, sort of psychologically. Nature is always either complementing that or contrasting that, and where scenes happen. For me, when I was writing, it was important what was happening in those scenes, and whether it was kind of a more bucolic nature or more sort of overbearing nature, or what kind of animal life was there, what kind of plant life was there. That it was always something that I was deciding specifically for each moment in the scene. So very personal to me, the place, but also hopefully it feels important to the scenes that are happening in those places.
Well, and the photography is really just stunning as well. You know, someone I think almost started when I think the composer's name came up, and almost started a little applause, then sort of stopped. Maybe they were shy, but I think that the music and the whole sound design deserves like great applause. And here, that's almost a character as well. Talk about that again. This whole, because it really does feel like it's really designed. There's I mean, all the sounds of nature, but in such a way. I mean, at one point when they're in the boat, Eric and his friend are in the boat, and you can hear the water dripping on the tin, on the metal, and it's a part of the conversation. It's like almost a part of the dialogue that they're having.
Yeah, sure. Just really quick, and neither of them are here, but the sound designer, Chris Foster, is somebody I worked with on my short films, and I hope to never work with another sound designer for as long as I live, because he's absolutely as important as anyone else on the film. You're supposed to bring them on after you're done editing, and it's kind of a last-minute thing, but he was so passionate about the film that he was on since the day we finished shooting, and he was sound designing, and we kept pissing him off because we'd have new edits, and he would have to change all the work that he did, but he was on the film for about a year and a half, which is a really, really long time for a sound designer, and it really shows in every scene. He wasn't pleased until I had to pull it away from him at the end when we had our premiere. But it was really important for him to have every scene sound unique, and to have the film sound quiet but also very loud with the nature. Like when you're standing outside, a lot of times you imagine it being quiet, but when you're out in the woods, it's actually quite loud, and it's actually kind of overbearing and just kind of startling to me in a way to be out there alone. And I wanted to put that effect on the screen. There isn't a lot of score, but the wind and the leaves and the bugs and all of that are the score to a lot of those scenes. So I wanted that to be very carefully chosen. And we did things with the ambience where we would take ambience from interior scenes and use it outside, and use outside ambience inside, and play ambience backwards, and mess with the pitch and mess with the speed, and just to give people sort of a subconscious feeling that something isn't quite right, or something is a little bit dreamy, without kind of always using score to signify how you should be feeling. We try to sort of use sound in subtle ways that you don't exactly know what you're hearing or why you're hearing it, but it's making you feel a certain way, hopefully. And the score was done by a man named Robert Dunn, who was in a band that I used to really love in high school. called La Bradford. They're kind of like an ambient rock band, and a filmmaker friend of mine is a close friend with his, and he said this is right up his alley. He's always wanted to score a film, and he recorded hours of original music, and we only used about 14 minutes of it in the movie. But that was another sort of like little nod to my kind of teenage years. Even the score was done by somebody who was important to me when I was the age of I guess the older brother. But every element of the film I wanted to be sort of tied in with the experience of being young, and that was kind of a cool little thing that happened very, very much towards the end. It was this sort of, kind of musical hero of mine kind of came in and was just this regular guy living in Virginia, and was like, yeah, it's a cool movie, I'll do some sound. So we've got a lot more music than you heard in the film, and we're trying to put out a soundtrack and all of that stuff. So, keep paying attention. I don't know exactly when that's going to happen or what form that'll take, but we've got hours, and there's so much more that I hope can be heard.
Well, that's great, because actually when I was watching the credits, I'm going, wow, I think for songs, there are all these like credits for songs, and I go, but where were they? Because for me, and it's like music, and I'm such a pain in the ass about music and films, and sometimes, oh my God, don't leave me here, don't leave. But here it was more like just like ambient sound, things that sort of give these kind of undercurrents. When you talked about the sound designer and the time that he spent on it, but did you talk about it as, say, you would a cinematographer, going, this is how we want this scene to be, and then you kind of talk them through? Yeah,
very much so. I think that sound is just as important as the visuals in a film, and I think a lot of people don't give it the credit that it deserves, and how impactful that can be. It has the advantage of not being in your face, and you're not necessarily aware of it, and it's doing all these things to your mind while you're watching a movie that you can't say, like, oh, the wide shot was so beautiful, and when you cut into the close-up, no one really ever talks about sound in reviews or anything like that, but that's probably more often than not what they're responding to. So, yeah, it was really important to me, and Chris had a lot of ideas, I had a lot of ideas, and yeah, we took a really, really, really long time with the sound, probably longer than he ever thought it would take, but people are constantly talking about it and bringing it up, and he's a master at what he does, and I really hope that he gets more work out of this film, and I hope more people take advantage of what sound can do for your film, and how kind of a less is more approach can be almost more impactful than constant score and constant loud effects and things like that.
Do you have any questions here so far? No, I'm looking in the back too. Oh, yes. In the back, yes. Uh-huh.
I'm curious about your process in working with children. I mean, primarily boys, I guess, on a group basis, but specifically on an individual basis.
I hope everybody heard that, but it's a question about, working with the child or the teenage boy actors, both as group and individually.
Yeah, I've worked with kids
and talk about how you cast them. And
Sure.
Talk about the kids themselves.
Yeah, I'll start with that, actually. I've worked with kids a lot in all of my short films, and obviously this film, and another film that we made a few years ago that I was the cinematographer, but Matt Peacock, one of my producers, directed, called A Little Closer, which was actually at Indie Night like a year and a half ago, which is also pretty cool. And so we just have a really good relationship with child actors, and I kind of don't get why people, you hear that rule, don't work with kids or animals or water, and I broke all of those. So I think those are three of the most engaging things to put on film. So anyone out there who's thinking about making a film, don't listen to those people. It's hard, but it's worth it. But so it was basically just an open call. We didn't have a casting director or anything like that, so we just did a call on Craigslist and Mandy and those kind of usual. It was very much like casting our student films. It was just sort of an open call to New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Connecticut. And we saw about, I'd say about 100 kids from the ages of 6 to 18, and with no real parts in mind for any of them. It was just sort of, let's meet a bunch of kids and see where they fit, and Brian and Nate, for all of us, were immediately the top two. They just sort of were head and shoulders above the rest in the way they were just very professional, and the auditions kind of were less of they weren't really reading sides or anything like that. It was just sort of, let's have a conversation and see if you can speak to me like a collaborator, less of an actor who comes in with like you're a good man, Charlie Brown monologue or something like that. So so they were able to tell us really personal stories and have a really interesting conversation with them, and it was clear that regardless of what the plot or the lines they had to say were, they would be able to at least put themselves in it. And that, to me, for a young actor is the most important thing, because you can very quickly see through a lot of child performances as they're just sort of doing what they're told. And it was important that they would take what I say, but also, make it their own.
How many of them, when it came down to it, in the cast, were they all professionals? Have you done a little work, non-professionals, a combination thereof?
Ryan, the younger brother, had done some TV and some student films, but always sort of extra work kind of things, and a little bit of theater in high school. But this was his first feature and his first sort of serious film role. And Nate had done nothing. The older brother, he was like a model in Atlanta, and he sent us this really silly headshot. But he was willing to fly in for the audition, so we welcomed him, and he was so raw and had none of that baggage that a lot of child actors have, where they're very over the top and they're very prepared, and it's sort of like high school theater. Which is, there's nothing wrong with that, but for a film like this, it's the exact opposite. So he was kind of so great because he didn't really know how to be any other way. He was just himself, and he told us these really amazing stories, and he has a lot of things about his family that he was willing to use in the role, and I thought that was very brave for a young actor, and we were just very impressed, and I just knew that you can look at his face, and it almost doesn't matter what's happening in the film. It's engaging to look at him look at something. It's, to me, really interesting. So anything on top of that we knew would work. So there was varying degrees of experience, but none of them had really been in anything serious before.
And in working with them, how easy was it? It seems, there's just such an organic feel to how they all dealt with each other. I have a feeling it's probably how they dealt with you as well. And did you do a lot of improvisation with them, or did they stick very close to a script that you wrote?
Yeah, that's a question a lot of people ask, is whether there was a script or if it was just a treatment or something like that. And there was an 80-page script that I wrote. But we always went into it, myself and the crew, as sort of a guide and as sort of something to fall back on if what was happening on set wasn't really working. We knew that there was this scene written that we could just get it and it would be sufficient and it would move the film forward. But the kids always had as much freedom as they wanted. There were sometimes, there's not a ton of, plot, quote unquote, in the film, but sometimes they would need to say something so that the next scene would make sense, that kind of thing, or please talk about this or talk about that. But they could say whatever they wanted for the most part, and I knew that what they would say would be much more natural and authentic than what I would write. Like an adult trying to write what a kid says always sounds artificial to me. So I had some words on the page, and they would read it and they'd say, I don't think I'd say that, I'd say this, and of course it was always better than what I had written. So yeah, they got to basically do and say whatever they wanted as long as it was within the bounds of what made sense in the scene, and there's a lot of improvisation, and that extended also to the shooting of the film as well. Like we had a shot list, and we kind of knew what things were going to look like, but there's a lot of scenes in the film that we'd be setting up for one scene, and somebody would come over and be like, oh, you should really see what Ryan is doing right now, and he'd be over on the side spitting on his leg and wiping the dirt off his leg, and it was like, oh, that's so much better than what I could have written. I would have never made that up. So we'd tell Ryan to keep spitting on himself, and we'd shoot it. And the opening and closing of the film where they're in the rain it was raining, and we couldn't shoot what was scheduled, so we just shot them in the rain, and it ended up being some of my favorite footage, and now it's kind of the bookend of the film. And just being able to keep an open mind about what's going to happen is probably better than what you can write a lot of times when you're out on a real world location like that is important. So just keeping an open mind and having the time to go off of the schedule a little bit here and there.
Yes.
I wanted to tell you how beautiful the film is, and I have a couple of questions. One, I want to go back to the sound design, which is, it's just a knockout, and it goes with the lushness of the visual images and the other crafting of the film. But I'd like you to talk a little bit about the emotional textures. The choice of the kind of music that you used was surprising to me. It was sort of cool in a way, and smoothly loud and dramatic, with just the emotional life of that sound. Could you? If you can you tell me about how you made those emotional choices of music?
So, yeah, this, in case you didn't hear it in the back, it's basically a question going back to the sound design, but about like the emotional choices of the sound and the music.
Sure, thank you very much. It's hard to sort of talk about that because it was kind of instinctual a little bit, especially the score. I let first there was some temp music in the film that I really liked that we couldn't end up using, and in the end I was really glad because the original score ended up being much more powerful and linked to what the film was than anything you could kind of find and stick in there. But the sound designer, or sorry, the composer watched that with that score, and then we sent him a version with nothing, and he kind of had to start from scratch. And he was able to sort of get a sense without me talking too much to him, because I wanted to just first see just what he did on his own without being influenced too much by me. He was able to sort of get a sense of the emotions of the scene without ever feeling like he was guiding your emotions one way or another. Like there's intense scenes, but the music's never necessarily intense, never telling you now it's time to be scared, now it's time to be happy, everything's going to be okay. That to me is the worst kind of score because it's not adding anything to the film. It's just sort of reiterating what you're already hopefully thinking if the film is succeeding. So the music was always meant to be an additional layer of this sort of ambiguity and the happy, sad, scary, beautiful, dark, light thing that I was trying to do with the scenes themselves. And the music is a lot of times there's multiple tracks that are almost contrasting with each other, but when listened to at the same time, they kind of have this weird way of complementing each other by being opposites. And that was sort of, the characters were doing the same thing, and some scenes were doing that. So hopefully your experience is that the music is just complementing another layer of what the scenes are already doing. It's not pushing you one way or another. It's just kind of agreeing with hopefully how you're already experiencing those scenes.
That's quite an accomplishment, and I think you've done that in the film. It's just really quite wonderful. My second question has to do with it's like with Kelly Reichardt or Christopher Munch. I didn't know where the film was going. I really, the narrative line I just sort of surrendered to the surprises of the film, which is again a compliment. But when you were writing the script, were you thinking at all, what am I going to do with this film when it's finished? Because it's been on the festival circuit. You've gotten very good reviews on this film. And I just wondered, where does it go? Or where do you want it to go?
Well, it's a question which is basically, you started with the question is when you were writing it, were you thinking where do you want it to go? But it's a good question for now, too. It's a question for a lot of independent films. Is where do you, and as if you didn't hear in the back, it has been going on the festival circuit and it has gotten very well reviews, and why not? Yeah, where do you see it going beyond the idea of course getting a distributor and getting a release, but did you have an Uber thought of that?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I would actually say that I wasn't really thinking too much about it, and I in hindsight, it's funny, we've been taking a lot of meetings this week for our next projects, and there's all this extensive pre-planning and who's your audience and what kind of film are you trying to make and what market is this good for, and that's all really important, obviously, especially when you're spending a lot of people's money. This film, I wasn't spending anyone's money but my own, and because of that, it was sort of a test for me to just see if I could even make a feature film. And if I made a decent film, I would be happy. And if anyone ever watched it, that would be just icing on the cake. And suddenly, so while I was shooting, no, that was never really like, well, what's the more audience-friendly version of this scene, or what's going to get more people in the seats, or what's going to make this more of a genre that people are gravitating towards these days. And that was never really the issue for me. It was always, what's the story that I want to tell? Who are the characters that I want to put on screen that I don't think are really represented very much in film? What are the films that I really love that I want to use as influences for myself? But it was never it's never much beyond that, and it changed a lot even during the course of the 2 weeks that we shot. It was after the first few days I kind of found what the film was, and then it even changed a little bit day to day. So all of the success that the film has had has been just kind of mind-blowing to me, because from the very first day it was like, I just hope that it's not a total disaster, and it seems like it's not, and people seem to be responding to it. And I think that all I can really say is that if you make a film that is personal and something that you believe in, then there's going to be someone, at least one other person out there, who's going to watch it and agree. And I just happen to be one of the luckier ones who more than one person agrees. But I hope I can continue that sort of thought process on to the next ones. It gets a little harder when you make bigger movies and there's more kind of at stake. So that's why a lot of people's first films are their best, I think, because there's just less. There's less on the line. You don't know as much about what you're doing, and I think that a lot of times frees you to make more interesting choices. And yeah, so what I hope it will do, it's already exceeded anything I ever hoped that it would do. So I don't really know how to answer that question. But everything that continues to happen is just a total dream, and I'm waiting for someone to tell me that this is a.
Is it available on any
joke.
format? Is it available on any platform?
Not at the moment. It's still doing festivals through the end of the year. It's looking like there will be a small release next year, which would be a few theaters, probably in New York and LA, and maybe a few other cities, and then probably right onto VOD, which is like Netflix and iTunes and that kind of thing. So it's doing quite well, and I think it'll continue to for the rest of the year, and then yeah, like I said, everything that's happening is just more than I ever imagined. So.
We actually have another thing here at 9 o'clock, so we're going to have to leave, but this woman's had her hand up, so you're going to be our last question right there.
Hi, I'm just curious, how did you come up with the story exactly? Like, is this from your own life, or?
Yeah, how did you come up with the story? You mentioned some of it is semi-autobiographical, so
Yeah,
what do you take from your life and create a story?
So it was some of the scenes I'd been just writing down that were things that happened to me. Either I'm a little bit of the younger brother and a little bit of the older brother, but I also have an older brother that's the same age difference. So it was things from my relationship to my brother, or things that just I remember going through as a kid. And I was just writing them down as scenes, kind of as I remembered them. And I started to be kind of fascinated with the idea of how you remember things and how it's probably not exactly how they happened, and imperfection of memory, and the way children live their lives sort of moment to moment. And it's not so much about a traditional film structure as you know, point A to point B to point C, and these 3 acts and everything ties up. It's kind of like, these are 20 things, 30 things that I remember very viscerally, and I wanted to just put them into a film. So I realized there's some thematic ties between the scenes I was writing, and I dramatized them a little bit to make them film scenes, and I added some B-plots, if you will, to make it just a full feature. But there's a few scenes, like my neighbor really was kind of psychotic, and he really tied my dog to a cinder block in the middle of the street. I didn't really throw the cinder block through his window, but I wanted to really bad. So I like to write characters that can kind of do what I could not do legally and get away with it. And you know, the brother relationship is sort of tied to my own life, and I went through some people passed away in my life at a young age, and that was always kind of influencing those scenes. So it started out as being very autobiographical, and it sort of slowly became its own thing that just, I always was like, well, what would the 11-year-old version of myself do here, or the 15-year-old version? And that always sort of dictated what those characters did. So it started as, you know, kind of almost like a diary, and then became a feature-length script, and just sort of, I was able to let go of the personal stuff, and some of it's still in there, but it's become its own thing.
Unfortunately, it is all the time we have. I'm going to, and somebody does have a question up there, but I'm going to say, and we're going to ask you to like sort of leave sort of quickly so that people can get in for the 9 o'clock screening, but we can all like reconvene up by where the amphitheater is and around there and ask Daniel more questions, I think, 'cause I know I have some, especially about influences. Daniel, and I love Daisy, by the way. I mean, hello, she's fabulous.
That was my real dog.
As your real dog? Oh my God. Okay.
Based on my real dog.
Well, anyway, so let's all take off, but let's all hang around the hall, and we'll ask Daniel some more questions.